In this video, I want to address concerns around how to build really hot, active compost piles even in the dead of winter in cold climates. So stick around and we'll get into it. So for most of you that follow this channel, this is a very familiar scene. There's tons of videos that I've talked about our chicken composting operation, all that. What I won't spend a lot of time on in this video is sprouting seeds and how we run that. You can look at our other videos for that. The main focus is going to be on when we're in this cold time of year, and we've had a particularly deep and cold winter thus far. We're in later January. We've had many nights below zero, -20 wind chills, and so how do we keep this happening throughout the winter so that our chickens have access to not only thawed but very warm, very moist, nourishing food. And I believe that this video should be applicable for anyone that also wants to just have hot active compost without chickens. Although I feel like the chickens mixed with the compost operation is an absolutely integral braid of functionality, but this is applicable for anyone that's doing it. Key ingredients that I found in order to keep compost hot, and I've had a number of comments where people said I set up a big pile of leaves or wood chips and never really got hot. In an ideal world, you start your compost pile in the fall while it's still warm, while the ground is warm. If you start a compost pile from scratch this time of year where the ground is frozen and there's a deep layer of snow, you're hard pressed to get it going. So in an ideal world, you start it in the fall. If you can't do that, you should remove the snow where you want to build your compost pile and build it with a lot. It's all about volume, so I'm always trying to increase the volume in this pile. This is comprised 60 or 70% wood chip by volume. There's a fair amount of leaves. I talk about collecting leaves in the fall, and if you look off to the left, you can see, and we'll talk about this in greater detail, where I'm using the snow to my advantage to take a cache of leaves and bring them over using a sled and an A.M. Leonard poly fork, which I find to be really useful for moving bulk material. But that's going to be a great source of mineral and bulking carbon, which adds volume, but also insulation and also some inertia.
Hey.
Goodness, that one just got pecked. At this point, this compost pile, it was started in the fall, where I found the piles stalling out when we got below zero temperatures and the compost started to really drop off, which might be something you're experiencing in the winter. A couple things that worked incredibly well for me for getting it sparked again and active. The first thing, and this may sound weird to some of you, I collect urine. It's an incredibly high value material. It has a pure nitrogen, and where the pile has stalled out or gotten cold, I apply urine. So some of the areas that had a lot of frost or frozen areas, we added urine to it. That wakes it up. The other thing you can do, and I'll cut away to a shot here where I have a huge pile of wood chips that haven't gotten as hot as I'd like, is to put a cover on them. Maybe you can apply burlap sacks and that'll help insulate them. But this time of year with a heavy snow load, you can even insulate your compost with a thick layer of loose snow. So I've put one of our other compost piles next to the driveway, and as we clear the driveway of snow, it all goes on that compost pile, which insulates it, and now it's starting to actually thaw out. And in this case, what I like to do, since we're using our chickens with this compost, is I'm constantly piling cold material back to where it's warm. So for example, I'm coming down at the bottom of the pile and putting it up on the hot part of the pile. So even though this has ice and is cold, by capping, so obviously heat rises. So if you keep capping the areas where heat is rising, it puts a lid on the heat and it helps the heat to spread out through the pile. So even though this is ice right now, by putting this on here with all of the heat that's latent underneath, it hits that lid and spreads out into the pile. That's part of the reason why I've added all these leaves next to this, is I can keep adding them up and on the top, material from the sides up and onto the top. And of course, in our system, we're adding food scraps to this for our chickens to eat on the top. They work on that, they scratch, it tumbles down, and I put it back on top, tumbles down, back on top. So the compost pile is like turning from the sides and getting piled up as it goes. They keep flattening it out. I keep building it up. They flatten it out. And so it's micro turns constantly in this scenario. In yours, if you have no chickens, you may find that you have a big pile of wood chips or leaves to break down. Try adding urine. Try adding food scraps from your house. You can put them in a 5-gallon bucket, pour hot water over that and stir it up to make a hot compost tea, and pour that into the center of your pile. With a tarp over it or burlap sacks, it should get it nice and hot. So this pile is about 175, 180 Fahrenheit, which is almost too hot. But for our chickens in a cold, cold winter, this is actually incredibly useful to us. So hopefully these tips have been helpful to add the fuel or the nitrogen, to think about bulking it as much as possible. If you have multiple small compost piles, bring them together to huddle for the winter so they can heat up, and consider integrating chickens if you haven't done so. This should be finished compost by the spring, even if we continue on with this incredibly cold winter. So thanks for watching.